If you've spent months trying to understand one person and you still feel like you're stuck, this masterclass is for you. I think that most relationship advice actually does keep people stuck. And that's coming from someone that used to teach and still does teach attachment theory. While I think that it's super valuable because yes, it helps you make sense of why people are the way that they are, it can bring compassion and clarity and even relief. What I noticed is that over time, people were becoming experts on their partners while still repeating the same painful relationship dynamics. So understanding their partners more did not actually equate into being able to create a relationship that felt good. They knew why their partner pulled away. They knew why their partner came back. They knew whether they were anxious, avoidant, fearful, avoidant. It didn't matter. At the end of the day, they still felt confused, powerless, and stuck. So that's when I realized that something was missing. A lot of us end up experiencing a relationship dynamic that hurts so badly that it consumes us and we want to understand what's going on. But in doing that, we completely miss the pattern that is shaping the relationship. Once you could see the pattern, everything changes. You stop looking at these isolated moments like whether or not they text you back, and you start understanding the dynamic that's actually been there all along. So that is what I'm gonna teach you in this masterclass. Most relationships don't start by being very confusing. As a matter of fact, most of them start the opposite way. This can be the most easy, flowy relationship that you've ever been in or that you've ever experienced. And then all of a sudden, there's some sort of a trigger point and the relationship takes a complete 180. When this happens, it's completely jarring, especially given the nature of how calm and peaceful you felt with this person shortly before. So the trigger is actually revealing a pattern, and the way that you both respond to the trigger determines how the pattern is going to unfold. When a trigger point happens, when something painful happens, we naturally zoom in. Our attention narrows in, and we go from being ourselves to being completely hypervigilant and consumed by the acute pain. We feel the rejection, the uncertainty, the confusion, and it's so intense that it pulls us into the questions. Why did they pull away? Will they come back? Do they care about me? Did I do something wrong? Should I reach out? And all of a sudden, this is all that we could think about. While all of these questions are super valid, and it's normal that we are consumed by them, what ends up happening is that when we get consumed, we stop getting curious. Our attention gets locked into this one painful moment, and we want to answer these questions in order to absolve ourselves from all of this discomfort. We want to answer all of these questions instead of asking this one very important question. What am I not seeing? What am I not fully seeing? Because dating is an exploration. And when we're dating, it's so important to get curious and figure out, who is this person? Is this a pattern of theirs? Maybe I don't know them as well as I thought I did. Because the truth is, as you're dating, you're just discovering how they handle conflict. How do they repair? Do they take accountability? But when we hit a landmine and we're consumed by this acute pain, the relationship completely shifts. And all of that exploration comes to a halt. Instead of gathering info, we become obsessed with making the discomfort go away. And that's when we slip from curiosity into our familiar survival patterns. That's the moment I'm interested in because that's where everything starts. So every relationship has three parts: your partner's experience and everything that they have been through and all of the things that they carry because of that, your version of that, your experiences, your history, your beliefs. And then there's something that most people never think to look at: the pattern between the two of you. Most of us become experts at the first two. Either we're super introspective, trying to figure out all of our things, or we spend years trying to understand somebody else. But the relationship doesn't actually exist in either person individually. It exists in the interaction between the both of you. And that's the piece that I think we're missing. Because once you start seeing the pattern instead of just the people, relationships become a lot less confusing. Every relationship follows a pattern, whether we realize it or not. And it usually begins with a moment, the trigger moment, that moment where everything changes. So maybe someone pulls away, communication changes, or a conflict doesn't get repaired. From there, both people make meaning of what happened through the lens of their own experiences. Those meanings activate familiar patterns, and those patterns influence how each person responds. Over time, those responses create a dynamic that can begin repeating itself without either person even realizing it. The important thing is that neither person is the cause of the pattern. It's truly a dance between the two of you. And once you can see your pattern, you stop experiencing the relationship as a series of random moments. You're able to zoom out and actually see the bigger picture. One of the biggest shifts I want you to make is how you think about responsibility. When people are hurting, they usually end up in one of two places. Either everything is somebody else's fault and we're blaming, or everything is your fault and you're taking all of the accountability. Neither of those perspectives are particularly helpful, and they both keep you stuck. Think of it this way: if all of the power sits with the other person, you're constantly just waiting for somebody else to change, which is a very powerless place to be. On the contrary, if all of the blame sits with you, you're left carrying all of this weight that you're not meant to carry. And relationships just don't work that way. They are co-created. Like we said, every relationship is shaped by the interaction between two people's histories, beliefs, nervous systems, and patterns. This does not mean that both people contribute equally to a situation, and it definitely doesn't mean that you should tolerate unhealthy behavior. It simply means that if you want to understand the situation you're in, you need to understand the dynamic, not just the person that you're with. I am so passionate about this because your pattern is literally the only thing that you have influence over. When you begin to understand how you interpret situations, how you respond under stress, and what role you naturally fall into, you stop feeling powerless. You start to respond with intention instead of reacting from habit. Whether the relationship grows stronger or whether you realize this wasn't the right relationship for you, you're able to make that decision from clarity and from self-trust instead of survival. Up until now, we've been talking about relationship patterns as if they're one thing, but they don't all look the same. People adapt in different ways. Some move closer when connection starts to feel uncertain. Some create distance. Some become hypervigilant. Some lose themselves trying to keep the connection. Others shut down before they can be hurt. All of these are different strategies, but they all have the same goal: creating safety when the connection no longer feels safe. As I was building this framework, I realized that everybody wanted to understand, what is my pattern? So I created a free relationship quiz, and it is linked down below. If you haven't taken it already, take it. It'll help you identify the relationship pattern that you naturally fall into so that you can start seeing your relationships through this lens. At a very, very high level, the chaser tries to create safety by moving towards connection at all costs. This spiral becomes overwhelmed by uncertainty and gets caught in a lot of emotional reactivity. The shapeshifter adapts to other people's needs and loses sight of their own. The fortress protects itself by keeping vulnerability at a distance. The devotee tries to earn love by becoming indispensable. The vanisher disconnects as soon as closeness feels overwhelming. And the lone wolf convinces itself that it doesn't need anybody. None of these patterns are good or bad. They are adaptations. They are intelligent responses to experiences that taught your nervous system what it needed to do to feel safe. Your goal is not to judge your pattern, it's to recognize it. Once you see it, you could stop mistaking it for your personality, and you can actually see it for what it is. It's a strategy, and strategies can change. One of the biggest reasons people stay stuck is because they spend so much time trying to influence things that they don't actually have control over. Whether someone else chooses to stay, whether they're emotionally available, whether they're gonna heal, whether they're willing to communicate, whether they're willing to take accountability. All of these things are not in your control. And the harder we try to control somebody else's choices, the more powerless we tend to feel. This doesn't mean that you have no influence over your relationships. It just means that your influence lives somewhere else. It lives in understanding your pattern, becoming aware of the meaning that you're making, and choosing how you want to respond instead of reacting automatically. That is where your agency is. Sometimes changing your side of the dynamic allows for the relationship to change. And sometimes it gives you the clarity to recognize that the relationship is not aligned with what you actually want. Either way, you're no longer waiting for somebody else to determine your future. You're responding from awareness instead of survival. And that's why I believe that this work is so powerful. Real change doesn't happen when somebody else becomes who you want them to be. It begins the moment you understand your pattern well enough to choose your responses consciously. I want you to imagine what your relationships would feel like if you can recognize your pattern before it took over. Instead of reacting automatically, you notice what's happening inside of you and you choose your response with intention. You stop spending months trying to decode somebody else's behavior because you're no longer looking for certainty in all of the wrong places. You're able to stay curious, communicate clearly, and make decisions from awareness instead of fear. Imagine trusting yourself so deeply that uncertainty no longer shakes you to your core. Imagine recognizing the difference between a relationship that is activating an old wound and a relationship that just isn't compatible for you. Imagine no longer needing every single answer before moving forward because you've just learned to trust your own judgment. This does not mean that relationships become sound perfect or that conflict doesn't exist. It just means that you experience them differently. You stop feeling like life is happening to you and start feeling like you're an active participant in creating the relationships that you want. That changes everything. If you've made it this far, I hope that you're starting to see your relationship through a different lens. Maybe you're recognizing yourself in some of the examples we went over today. Maybe you're realizing that you've spent so much time trying to understand another person that you've never really learned to understand the dynamic that's unfolding between the two of you. That is an incredibly powerful realization, but it's only the beginning. Awareness does not automatically create change. Most of us have been responding from these patterns for years. They are deeply ingrained and automatic. We don't choose them consciously, and they just take over as soon as connection stops feeling safe. That is exactly why I created the pattern shift. This is not another course about decoding other people. It's a framework for understanding yourself in relationships so you can stop repeating dynamics that no longer serve you. In the pattern shift, we'll identify what your relationship pattern is. We'll understand why your nervous system developed it in the first place. We'll learn how to recognize it in real time and practice responding differently before it takes over. Through the course, you're going to recognize where your power actually lies. You'll learn to move from reactivity to intention. And finally, you'll be able to navigate your relationships with clarity, confidence, and self-trust. Through all this work, you might actually be able to create a healthier dynamic. But sometimes when you do this work, you recognize that this relationship you're in is here to show you what you do not want. Either way, you're no longer trapped in an unconscious pattern and you're able to respond from awareness instead of survival. If this feels like the shift that you've been looking for, I would love to help you in the pattern shift. If you're ready, click the link down below and I'll see you inside.